what a nice music. Hey Anna Christina, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, and you?
Very good.
Relaxing.
Oh, this is Sam. Hi Sam,
Sam.
how are you?
Thank you.
Okay, we need to.
Colleagues will start in a few minutes. We're going to leave a little bit more time for other colleagues to join, and we'll be starting momentarily. Thank you. Maybe 4 or 5 minutes. Thank you so much. Okay, colleagues, thank you very much for joining back. This is the last session of the first Global Food Regulatory Science Symposium. Thank you very much to all our participants and contributors. And in terms of a wrap-up session, we felt that at least 2 areas would be of interest. Definitely looking at opportunities of investment in the region in a more comprehensive and structured approach, and also talking about an aspect that various competent authorities, food business operators everywhere around the world had to deal with in the last period during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's, of course, being able to prepare to be more resilient, to address essentially situations like the pandemic of COVID-19. So we're going to start with the first presentation coming to us from colleagues from the World Bank, Ana Cristina Canales Gomez and Artavast Hakobian from the Global Agriculture Practice. We'll be discussing opportunities of investment in food safety infrastructure and programs using the One Health lens. Thank you very much, Artavast. You're joining us from Cairo. Ana Cristina, you're joining us from Washington, I believe. So very early in the morning, early in the afternoon for you, Artavast. Thank you very much for joining us. And the floor is yours.
Ana Cristina, would you like to go first?
No, I plan my presentation to go after yours.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Samuel, for the great introduction. And it's a great pleasure and privilege to present in this forum and to this audience. And thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to do so. Let me just share my screen, which I cannot do because the host has disabled. And perhaps if I have an opportunity to share my screen, I can.
I think I can share mine, Artavast, so I can share your PowerPoint.
We're gonna actually enable you, Artavast. Okay. 1 second, okay. Just to make sure you will be enabled in a few seconds. You should be able now.
Okay, I'm able now to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
As always, there is some small glitch with the remote presentation. I wanted to offer a few thoughts about the economic case for food safety capacity building. I know the audience are distinguished food regulators, and there is really no need to make to highlight the importance for food safety capacity building. However, when we speak to policymakers and to government officials, to the ministers and other partners who actually design the policies or provide funding for policies, sometimes it is useful to think in a structured way for making the economic case for food safety capacity building. So allow me to really focus on that and present the importance from the economic development point of view. So traditionally, many people think that food safety is something that happens in the labs, and that's kind of the traditional image of food safety. However, when we really look in depth, we actually find that food safety has foundational basis to many of the sustainable development goals. And it's important for achieving the top 3 sustainable development goals: no poverty, zero hunger, and good health and well-being. And it is also very important from the gender and equality point of view: clean water and sanitation, decent work, and economic growth and sustainable cities. So in a way, food safety is a critical element for achieving sustainable development goals. When we talk about food safety, and actually when policymakers, when many people talk about food safety, they see the tip of the iceberg. They see that food safety impacts trade, food safety costs farms some money, but because basically policymakers look at the food safety from the trade perspective, which we call tip of the iceberg. But then if we look at the whole story, we also see that consumers get affected significantly. That there are, in many countries, we see fragmented regulatory frameworks, and we see that foodborne diseases place a heavy toll on the populations, especially on the poor people. Recent studies by WHO have shown that food safety has as much burden on public health, which could be compared to key public health risks such as AIDS, HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. And from the commercial point of view, we see that the global trade exacerbates food safety problems. Urbanization, for instance, in this slide, we see that urbanization changes the way we consume food. This is, of course, an example from Asia, but I think it is very also relevant for Middle East and North Africa, and certainly quite relevant to Egypt, where I'm presenting this presentation from high and rapid urbanization, and also young population drive the tastes and preferences of consumers, and we see significant shifts from traditional kind of diets to more modern diets, which include, prepared foods, which include more oil and fat, more protein-based diets, and that also changes the way the food safety problems are apparent. We also see that with the expansion of food exports, we also see high dependence on food imports. For instance, in Asia, we see growth of food exports, but we also see in this region, in Middle East of Africa and North Africa, and also especially in the Gulf region, heavy reliance on food imports, which creates commercial imperative for maintaining trade standards and improved trade surveillance for food safety. Of course, the middle class, the growth of the middle class, and especially in the emerging economies, creates sustained demand for food and for more food. That also kind of exacerbates the situation for food safety control as imports rise, as well as domestic production rises. So foodborne illnesses affect at 4 levels. At the consumer level, we see cost of illness and treatment, food avoidance, and higher prices for safer food. Sometimes people perceive organic food safer and they pay higher prices, and people perceive farm-grown food and they pay higher prices. So really higher costs on the consumers from the health perspective, but also from the perspective that because of the lack of information, they have to pay higher prices to get food that they perceive is safe. Unsafe food also has impacts the farms or food producers or food processors, because it increases the costs from the lost sales lower prices that they pay, as well as fines and consignment rejections that they incur because of they are unable to meet standards, because they are unable to meet the regulatory requirements, as well as because they need to throw away the food if it is perceived to be unsafe. And from the overall economy perspective, public health costs, tourism issues, and overall loss of productivity can significantly affect the economy as a whole if we face unsafe food. Globally, the estimated annual loss from unsafe food is about $110 billion. And we see that many countries in this graph represent the region. I can see, of course, Egypt, Iran, and other countries of the region that really are at the top of the loss when it comes to food safety illnesses. And this is a more kind of summarized picture after African continent and Southeast Asian region. Eastern Mediterranean region is classified by WHO is the third that suffers from foodborne illnesses, and they can be as high as 570 persons per 100,000. Per 100,000 population. So when we revisit the iceberg, we basically saw not only the trade-related costs that affect the economy because of unsafe food. We see domestic costs for unsafe food, and that basically brings us to the imperative of food safety capacity building, needing to regulate and build capacity not only for trade, but also for the domestic regulation, for the domestic capacity building for safe food. And there are three dimensions that we basically want to work in order to create this capacity. Eliminating domestic cost avoidance, improving food market performance, and improving international competitiveness. And that's basically the economic case for food safety capacity building. Here, I would like to bring a case study, an example of how the World Bank approaches food safety capacity building. And here I am bringing an example of the work that we did in Vietnam a couple years ago. We focused on food safety risk assessment, and we looked at the providing options and policy recommendations to the government of Vietnam for strengthening food safety risk assessment, risk analysis, and risk mitigation capacity. So that was at the turning point for Vietnam, when Vietnam adopted new food safety legislation and wanted to improve the regulatory acts in order to harmonize them with more modern, more scientifically based, risk-based food safety regulatory framework. Together with the counterparts, we analyzed the institutional and policy framework for food safety and provided policy recommendations based on the international best practices. Our report is available online, but key areas of the report where we did in-depth analytical assessments focused on the value chains, identifying food safety risks in value chains. We identified and categorized food safety risks, and we used the survey evidence to make the case to the policymakers for improved capacity building, for more risk-based regulatory framework, and for improved policy implementation at the ground level. I will stop here and I will turn to my colleague Anna Cristina, who will talk about the World Bank's approach to One Health. And I thank you very much for your attention. Over.
Thank you, Artavas. If you can stop sharing your screen, thank you. I can start sharing mine. And hopefully you're seeing my screen now. Yeah. So thank you very much, Artavas, for that presentation. Thank you very much, Samuel, for inviting us. It's an honor to be here. And I just want to briefly complement Artavas's presentation on food safety, putting it under the context of One Health, because right now the World Bank is leading the work on food systems transformation, considering that our food systems are no longer fit for purpose. And food safety is one of the many aspects that are interwoven in this work, together with, for example, animal health and welfare, that, as we know, has a critical impact on food safety and food systems, AMR, and many other aspects. And just like Artavas mentioned, the purpose of this food systems transformation is healthier people, healthier planet, and healthier economies. So as we saw with Artavas's presentation, food safety has a massive impact in health of the planet, of the economies, and of people. They also, food safety also, for example, has a big impact on food loss and waste. And the safety of food is closely intertwined with the safety and health of animals. So food safety right now is part of the work that is carried out under One Health and as the food systems transformation. So what I want to present today is how the bank is operationalizing One Health as part of this new agenda. So as a first point, I would like to present what are the key principles for investing in One Health for the bank. And these key principles, the first one is that the starting points, and I'll show a slide a bit later, the starting points for One Health will always vary by context, disease, and objectives. So countries need not only very strong human, animal, and environmental health management systems and coordination, but we also need to conduct mapping activities at the starting point, at the onset, to understand what is the situation in each country and each region if we want to take a regional approach. One Health is integral to the success of multi-sectoral national action plans for health security. It is with this integrated view that we'll address health security to reduce disaster risk and optimize pandemic preparedness and prevention and planning. One Health approaches should be built into the project design from the onset, so that we manage to frame and design projects with the integrative multidisciplinary One Health approach. We manage to engage all the relevant stakeholders from the early stage, promote common understandings and joint solutions, and anticipate the risks that stem from the gaps and the duplication, so we can facilitate coordination and communication. That is an important, this is also goes in tandem with the mapping I was just mentioning. And it's very important to have the landscape very clear when we take on any project on One Health. And then communication, of course, is a key priority for One Health and for understanding One Health and its implementation. With clear communication at all levels for all stakeholders, starting from consumers, we can plan for disease event and maintain strong multi-sectoral coordination channels. We can ensure effective messaging. For example, in one project that I'm going to mention a bit later, under the global platform for avian influenza that was led by the bank, this project was implemented in Egypt, and there were one of the many success factors of the projects was a very strong and clear campaign of communication that involved artists, singers, musicians, religious leaders, politicians, NGOs, everybody together to conduct this very thorough campaign that targeted consumers on, in this case, how to handle poultry to prevent avian influenza. It is with these kind of communication strategies that we manage risk, but we do it in an efficient way, and also we increase the credibility and the trust of those that are involved when it comes to consumers. Some cross-cutting drivers of One Health is we need to foment a solid connection between the operationalization of One Health and the global health security agenda, because we need to shift from country responses to global public goods. We need to foster partnerships that in turn will facilitate sharing responsibilities and resources. We need to implement the health in all policies. All the development policies, projects, and activities have to be reviewed for their health impacts. We're not only shifting from national to regional and global, we're also shifting from response to prevention. So in terms of food safety, this means that instead of controlling, for example, at the sales point, we need to go upstream and work with producers in the farm, in the fisheries, where animals are also produced, and work One Health with them and consider One Health food safety as part of the food production continuum, not as isolated points along the value chain. And again, the engagement and community level is key. It's critical for the functioning of food safety under a One Health approach. The stages of operationalizing One Health is, again, starting with a diagnosis and mapping. We can learn from past experience. We can use learning products, and we can use tools from external partners. We have the PBS, we have JEE, we have many relevant tools. We need to create an enabling environment where we define the scope and the entry points for work, allow for coordination, put all the stakeholders together, get them to communicate and collaborate across disciplines, and enable, of course, multi-sector strategies. The implementation, that if we did the previous steps right, implementations should be smooth and effective. And of course, we need monitoring and evaluation, and the bank has developed tools for this that I can leave with the resources of this presentation. Just as one relevant point, for One Health, entry points matter, the context matter. In the left, we see the traditional Venn diagram that depicts One Health, in which we see animal health, human health, and environmental health systems working together to implement a One Health approach. In the right, we see an example of how this Venn diagram adapts to adapt to different country scenarios, country and regional scenarios, because there is no just one solution that fits all. The role of each sector is going to vary tremendously per disease and per regional or country context. Here we have the Venn diagram adapted for Nipah virus. This is a case in Bangladesh, and since flying fox bats, where the reservoir for Nipah virus in this particular case, the role of the environment and animal health is much bigger than the role of human health as a driver and an entry point for One Health. In some cases, some of these bubbles will be, or circles will be smaller. In some cases, they will be bigger. There was another case of Nipah virus in which there was the transmission was different, and of course then we could see that each circle was different in the Venn diagram. And finally, just a couple of, and sorry, this slide I realize looks very heavy, a couple of examples of what actually makes a project a One Health project. We have the regional and global public good approach. For example, we have the Redice project in West Africa now going to Central Africa, and it's phase 4. And instead of it's an interdependent series of projects in which the success of the whole project relies on the success of each one of these countries, and it banks on the individual successes to foster collective gains. There are regional projects. We have the Africa Center for Disease Control that builds common resources centers and shares information and resources. We have projects that strengthen multi-sectoral coordination and communication. For example, the global program on Ebola and influenza that I mentioned before creates One Health platforms, and actually in Egypt, this One Health platform survives, is still in place today. Again, the Egypt COVID-19 emergency response is also enabling communication and coordination platforms under a One Health approach. We have a shift to prevention and preparedness from the traditional response to prevention and preparedness for risk management through investment in surveillance, laboratory capacity, and human resources development, just capacity building, again, like Artavas was mentioning. We recognize the close links among animal, human, and environmental health. An example in Brazil, the POI Productive and Social Inclusion Project expanded between public health, education, animal health to address tropical neglected diseases. So they took the close link between environment and health, but also targeted other drivers that were very important, such as education. And finally, we have multi-sectorality, which is basically the nature of One Health. Again, here we have an example in Bangladesh, the Metro Dhaka Transformation Platform. It's led by the Urban Global Practice in the Bank, with a collaboration from human health, agriculture. So it's basically a very, very good example of what One Health can do. I'm sorry that not all my examples are based in Middle East and North Africa region, but I'm happy to produce more if necessary. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ana Cristina and Artavas, for this great overview. And we can take a few minutes for some questions or some comments, if there are any in the audience or potentially online. Just gonna see if there are any questions online. I don't see any. Perhaps I do have a question. Oh yeah, sorry. Oh, please. No, please. Okay.
I just had a question in regards to laboratory capacity building in regions. What does this look like in terms of support for capacity? Is it infrastructure, people, capabilities? How does that look from the World Bank One Health?
Did you hear the questions? The question, colleagues?
Not that. Could you repeat it? Or maybe I can hear you very clearly, Sam.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually.
Thanks, Anna. It's just regarding the laboratory capacity building that you mentioned as part of the One Health initiative. What does that look like? Is it in laboratory infrastructure, support for developing laboratory infrastructure? Is it for capacity building? Is it for equipping?
And maybe I can go first. And Artavas, you also mentioned capacity building. Then you can. In the projects that I mentioned, one was the Africa CDC, and there's also there's also a project on East Africa Laboratory Network. And usually in those projects that are very much focused on developing laboratory networks, it is both. It's capacity building, and it's the update and improvement of laboratory infrastructure. So you can see the two of them, but mainly, or also like a very strong component is not only, like putting back in place laboratories, but actually generating systems that cooperate and communicate among each laboratory. So you can have very effective surveillance networks. There is, apart from those that I mentioned, there is also a history of food safety capacity building in the unit, in which there were only capacity building programs. There were collaborations in which professionals from certain countries could visit other countries. For example, there was a collaboration ongoing for years with Singapore Food Safety Agency, in which people from different would apply from different regions and go to Singapore to train on particular methodologies and over there. Artavas, do you want to come in?
Thank you very much, Ana Cristina, and thank you very much for the question. In many countries, in fact, the World Bank supports laboratory capacity building, and Ana Cristina presented the whole kind of what we call the value chain of the work, starting from the identification of needs, identifying the infrastructure requirements, trainings, the system requirements, as well as the twinning requirements. So in many of our projects, we have this kind of comprehensive lab capacity buildings, and the examples that Ana Cristina showed, I think these are good examples as well. We also have a number of examples in other parts of the world. In China, a very recent project for food safety that includes significant rehabilitation and construction of new laboratories. We have similar projects also in Europe and Central Asia, and also in Africa, as was mentioned. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these examples. I guess actually maybe I had one last question to wrap up this item, and perhaps Ana Cristina and Artavas, from your experience, particularly in attempting to implement the One Health approach, what are the major impediments that you face? What are the major challenges, particularly if we take the experiences that you shared in the African continent, for example?
Artavas, do you want to go first?
Well, One Health is easier said than done. So that's maybe a very quick response to the question, because it involves collaboration of various institutions and various agencies and various sectors. Sometimes it's difficult to bring everybody together around the table. So I think that's the main challenge. But food safety, if we just take one component of food safety, it is also collaboration of various government agencies, collaboration with the private sector, collaboration with farming communities. So it's not easy, but we can see in many places where it is happening, it is yielding significant results. So my response to your question is that this multi-sectoral collaboration is the main challenge for the One Health agenda. Over to you, Ana Cristina.
Thank you. I think I completely agree. I think that it's the sitting the right partners and getting everybody to communicate and share information is not always easy in each country. And I think that one way of addressing that is actually the political commitment that basically pushes a bit more those people to need to sit down and share. And I think that another shift that we need to see in the implementation of One Health is the drive. So thus far there has been a lot of drive from the donor community to the countries. And I think that now it's the countries that the countries and the regions, I think regional approaches are very important, that who need to take the driver's seat and determine what are the needs, because as we said, it's not a cookie cutting thing. It's something that is tailored to each country. So take the driver's seat, identify their own needs, gaps, their own strengths, and basically drive the One Health car on. So shift that thing and generate their own resources and the own drive and the own information to establish One Health and push it forward.
Thank you very much to both of you. And one last question here from Gabor Molnar.
Hello, hi, I'm Christina. This is Gabor from UNIDO. Hi, Artebas. Hi. Perhaps a question, a follow-up question to the point I mentioned, that what can we do as development partners do in the future in order to basically collaborate among the different initiatives which are taking place in the country. Very often these initiatives are supply-driven, meaning we know what the government and our beneficiaries would require, but we have to have this behavior change among them to understand their actual needs. So how can we actually contribute to that as development agencies?
Should I start this time, Artebas, and then you continue? I think that there will be a lot of different needs as we move along in developing One Health. I think that at this point, what is really important is that we all sit together and take stock of what each one of us is doing and try and aim to cooperation, to collaboration. So it happens a bit sometimes with that a lot of people are doing similar things that may be overlapping. And if we manage to map those resources and those initiatives, we'll probably be more able to obtain a synergistic yield out of those or added value, just like One Health, added value of things done in coordination instead of independently. So I think that talking, sitting in the table and looking at what each one of us is doing to get the most efficient and effective result is key, and also understanding and taking the best use of each of us, or each of our capacities. So if we need to recognize that there's a tripartite, that it's a knowledge partner, that there's UNIDO, that there's the bank, and that everybody has a very strong role to play, and that the result will be better if we all sit and coordinate. And I think that later in the way we'll have different roles and we'll take different approaches, but I think now that's relevant.
Thank you very much again to you both, Anna Cristina and Artebas, for being with us and for contributing to this symposium. And again, another round of applause to you.
Thank you very much.
In fact, we are reaching the last presentation of the symposium, and of this closing session. And I have the privilege to introduce Dr. Pamela Byrne, the CEO of the Food Safety Authority of Ireland. And Pam, as you know, is also a founding member and the vice president of the Global Food Regulatory Science Society. Pam will be sharing with us a presentation on the imperatives of resilience of food regulatory systems. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you very much, Sam, and it's my pleasure to talk to you again today. It is with, I suppose, a little bit of disappointment that this is the end of the workshop, because I have learned a huge amount since I got here, and I'm sure those of you who are online, and indeed those of us in the room, we've learned an awful lot from one another. I wanted to share with you a little bit about what happened in Ireland, in the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, when COVID-19 hit. But before I do, I suppose one of the things we need to continuously remind ourselves is, what is a food regulatory system? And I know that the FAO presented earlier on in the week and spoke about this, but effectively it is a system of components that need to stand up to and be robust enough to withstand a crisis. And of course, one of the crises, and the crisis we're in at the moment, is a public health pandemic. And of course, all of us are very grateful that it isn't a food safety crisis. But of course, it allows us to look at our own systems and understand whether or not they would withstand the disruption if it was. And there are some questions I think we have to ask ourselves, and indeed some lessons that we have to learn. But let's just have a look at what we mean by resilience. And I found this, there are many definitions in the dictionaries and on the web, but this was one I found, but I've adapted it slightly for the purposes of this talk. The capacity of a food regulatory system to absorb disturbances and to reorganize while undergoing change so as to still retain essentially the same function, structure, identity, and feedback mechanisms. And if you look at those words in bold, I just want to capture a little bit more of an insight and share with you, again, some of these aspects, what happened in Ireland and what is still happening in Ireland, because we're not out of the pandemic, and indeed we're continuously, as we're all experiencing, different waves. But before I go on, I just heard, and just put this slide into my presentation, because one of the important messages that's come out of the last discussion, and indeed throughout the entire seminar, the workshop, is about collaboration. No food safety system exists on its own. It will not be successful on its own. And this is how we're organised in Ireland. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it just describes to you at a very high level the number of actors who need to be plugged in, engaged, and working with all of us in order for us to successfully protect consumers, and of course to make sure that trade continues, particularly now that we've started to look at the challenges that the food system and the global food system had to endure over the last number of months. So this is just a visual of the Irish system, but you can see it's very much guided by policy at a governmental level. It is very much then operationalized through various different systems of formal engagements and formal agreements, as well as then with memorandum of understanding agreements that we have with other organizations in the state. It is effectively, though, a state system. There is no private involvement in this control system, apart from the responsibility to put safe food on the market is that of the food business operator. Just reminding ourselves again what the food system looks like, and I just want to capture around this what I think a food system needs to consider in a crisis. Flexibility, it needs to be risk-based, it needs to be based on partnerships, lots of procedures need to be in place, clarity of roles and responsibilities. Early warning systems are incredibly important, but it is also important to make sure that you're putting information into the system, not just in a timely way, but that it's accurate, that you have capacity and capability, and we just talked about capacity within laboratories earlier on today, and indeed earlier on in the seminar about consumption surveys, etc. We also heard a little bit about agility and agile systems in the context of digitalization, but of course inspection systems are traditionally based on certain procedures and approaches, and of course in a crisis you have to be agile and think on your feet. It has to be responsive, so you need to train people to do things in a different way, you need to educate consumers and educate businesses, and you also need to make sure that you're communicating clearly, frequently, but it's also timely and accurate. Don't communicate into the system just for the sake of it. Make sure what you're communicating is accurate and is also at the right time. Because the last thing we wanted to do in Ireland as a food safety authority was contribute even further to the noise that was in the system around COVID-19, and I'll share a little bit about that in a moment. We have early warning systems in the authority, so we were watching developments right across the world. This is obviously the first indication from the ECDC, and then on the right-hand side, it's just an email that went from one of my emerging, our early watching, or people who watch what's going on outside and tell us internally within the organization. This was effectively the starting point, I suppose, for FSAI to start thinking about what it was going to do. The tipping point came, though, when the ECDC started to ask for food control systems and governments to really strengthen their capacity to respond to such an event. And of course, at that point in time, there was lots of information coming into the system, but we had to make sure we were ready as an organization to respond. So very quickly, we set up a team, we developed an incident response plan, we used the skills that we have in food safety crisis management to make sure that we had a plan in place for the organization to respond, to make sure that we were able to maintain business as usual. But of course, business as usual was not usual. It was very different, and it still is very different, and it will be very different in the future. Consumer concerns. So all of a sudden, we had an increase in the number of people contacting our advice line, both online and on the phone. Handling food, storing food, was loose food safe in the retail setting? You know, they had concerns about business practices, and all of this was information that was coming into us, and very quickly we had to turn that information and communicate out through frequently asked questions. So we put a frequently asked questions document on our website, communicated it out through our social media channels, and we continued to update that as new information became available. So we became a source of trusted information that consumers could go to in relation to food. And we then directed them to information that they would need in order to protect themselves from COVID-19. And of course, there were many. But there were also threats to the food supply that we had to consider. Coronavirus, these are some headlines at the time in our media, and indeed I'm sure these were replicated all over the world. But there was a surge in sales. People were stockpiling. They were buying, goods that they could then put in their cupboards, in their freezers, cleaning products. There was a rush on many of these products, and of course, that created chaos then within the retail and the supply chains. So you had retailers looking to us for information. Can we, in fact, allay fears that of consumers with respect to food? And of course, we worked with our retailers, and indeed we also then made sure that we were connected in at a European level. So networks and collaboration and working in partnership become critically important. And I would say that yes, it's important, and in Europe we have very well established networks, but indeed I also relied, and indeed my team relied on, international networks with scientific organizations who started to help make sure that we were able to present the information in a clear way. But of course, food security became an issue because all of a sudden, countries in Europe, even though we have a single market, started to close down their borders. And of course, this market and this environment is based on the free movement of people. But of course, when borders shut down, then people can't move, product can't move. And all of a sudden, we had trucks stopped at borders and unable to bring food into countries where those countries fully relied on. And indeed, as an island, we couldn't get food off the island. And we export 90% of what we produce in Ireland, which is a big, big challenge then for us in terms of maintaining the integrity of that food. So as I said, we also got a number of concerns raised to us with industry, but again, we have very well established networks at a national level with our industry partners. And indeed, this is just a snapshot of our website where we have information on COVID-19. And in fact, that was updated on a very, very regular basis and is still there for businesses to look at, to remind themselves. But these are the kind of issues that industry raised with us. Of course, the official control system was disrupted. The normal traditional inspection systems, effectively with the health and safety advice from government saying, unless you're an essential worker, stay at home. And of course, that then led to a whole designation of essential workers. So the government worked with all of the agencies and said, you need to identify who your essential workers are. Those essential workers need to have a letter from me giving them permission to move around the country, because obviously we didn't want to contribute to the transmission of coronavirus around Ireland. So there was remote working, there was a designation, as I said, there was a diversion of resources to tracing and testing. This became really challenging because our health agency inspectors are also a significant group of inspectors that inspect food businesses. And they effectively were diverted to tracing and testing. Now, at the same time, businesses shut down, so we didn't need as many inspectors inspecting food businesses. They needed to obviously be deployed. And of course, this comes back to this concept of agility and flexibility. And particularly important is flexibility within the context of your legal requirements. So we've really moved away in Europe from very prescriptive legislation to more directional legislation. And obviously we have a very, very significant legal framework, as do all of the countries. But it is about having flexibilities, or at least being flexible. So there was a big call out from all of the member states for the Commission to think about whether or not there could be flexibilities in terms of, you know, how we did inspections, etc. And there was a piece of legislation put into the system that facilitated that. And there was guidance also, as well as there was guidance from the WHO and indeed the FAO as well. Then there were challenges. So with the disruption of the official control system, that led to opportunity. And of course, opportunity from a food business perspective or from an individual perspective led to challenges for us as a regulator. Significant opportunities arose with respect to fraud. There was unauthorized health claims put on products, claiming that if you consume this product, you would reduce the likelihood of you getting COVID-19. None of these claims were substantiated. In fact, all of them are legal within the context of the legislation. Changes in food business risks. So you had a restaurant now that had been operating as a restaurant for many, many years. All of a sudden, it was a takeaway. People were cooking at home, but they were getting their food delivered to them in boxes. There was online selling, and that ramped up quite significantly in the early days and has now sustained. So we have a significant trend of increasing selling online. And of course, e-commerce and the trading of food or the selling of food to consumers is challenging in any case, but is now becoming even more challenging with the new ways of selling food through Instagram, through Facebook, through other social media sites. Things that we knew were happening but didn't necessarily have a good understanding of, so we've increased our understanding there. A number of different health and safety issues, so COVID measures versus food safety measures, environmental measures, etc. Lots of closed businesses, but then all of a sudden we were out of lockdown and those businesses could open up again. Had they stored their food correctly? Or were they now putting food that they had stored but not correctly into the system again? You know, what were their sanitation protocols? Did they sanitize well enough when they opened up again? And of course, this led to an increase again from our point of view in terms of information and putting that information into the system, but also communicating to businesses through our established networks. There was a sudden ramp up of activity all of a sudden, but there were businesses, big businesses, who had a huge kind of market within the food service sector, and effectively fell off the cliff overnight. And all of a sudden, those businesses transferred operations to doing things in a different way. There was a reduced number of workers. Of course, you had less people in the system because many people were out sick with COVID-19, or indeed were caring for people with COVID-19, or were close contacts. So all of a sudden, the employment, the workforce was decreased. So lots of stuff going on in the system. So effectively, the system is in crisis, and therefore it is important that the system you have can withstand and stand up to a disruption of this nature, even though it wasn't and thankfully isn't still a food safety issue. Risk assessments were a significant challenge. We had an epidemic. There was 125,000 scientific articles released within 10 months, the first 10 months of COVID-19. 80,000 of them were open access, 30,000 of them were in preprint, many of them were not peer reviewed. And these were this was the information that in fact the media was using. And so we then had to kind of, with our international partners, cut through some of this. So we relied very much on our national and international scientific networks for support. But we also published a qualitative risk assessment on the development of COVID-19 illness from the consumption of bivalve mollusks. It was a particular issue that was raised by our government, and they asked us to do this piece of work. And thankfully, we were able to rely on those networks to do that. It's published on our website, so anybody can download it. These are some of the headlines. This was a time, a photograph taken many years ago when I looked an awful lot younger, but indeed, these were the headlines. 17 tons of food seized as illegal producers surge. Safety watchdog pounces after COVID prompts a surge in illegal food sales. Illegal food is sold from grubby gaffs. What are gaffs? If you're not an Irish person, a gaff is a home. It's where you live. And this was one of the most shocking things that we came across, and we came across many. This is a sushi business operating illegally from the bedroom of a residential home in Dublin. It had a massive following on Instagram. In fact, it had influencers promoting the wonderful products that were being produced from this bedroom, and they were being delivered all over Dublin And we came across it because we had always been going through, looking and watching what was going on the social media sites in terms of food. You can see, and anybody who inspects a food business or audits a food business, and many people in this room will know that that is not a hygienic food producing premises. It's not a registered premises, first and foremost. It has no food safety management system, and it certainly isn't one that is visited by any inspector. Of course, this posed an interesting challenge for us because our legal empowerments don't allow us to enter into a residential house. So we had to get a court order from the enter with the police force in order for us to be able to enter in and shut this business down. Business in inverted commas, because it isn't a business, but they were making lots of money. But what we started to see was lots of people who were put on furlough and they had to make a living. So this is how they were trying to make a living. So there's almost a moral dilemma here in a crisis as to what do you do and how do you operate. But ultimately our job is the protection of consumer health. And it is important for us to make sure that we are able to shut down businesses like this. So we've learned some lessons of flexibility in our legislation, but also we've relied on new partnerships that we never thought we were going to have to work with across the state. And this has been really important for us as well. The meat plants, and this is a story that went around the world. It's not just an Irish story, it's a global story. Many of the meat plants who were producing food were actually and securing food into making sure that there's food available for our consumers to buy. Were environments that effectively just enabled, fast transmission of COVID in the early days. But we worked with our colleagues in the public health service and within the industry and provided our expertise as food safety experts in the conversation that was really about public health and still is about a public health pandemic. Thankfully, we don't have this situation, but of course it has raised an awful lot of questions in terms of who is working in the industry, where are these people coming from? So we have an awful lot of people who come into Ireland, immigrants who come into Ireland in order to work in these types of premises. And of course, their language, their culture is very different. And it became incredibly political, this particular issue, and an awful lot of it came down to welfare, human welfare of the people that were working in these premises. But in fact, all of this now thankfully has moved away. But I would say that the industry has responded fantastically to this challenge. They have maintained food on our shelves. They have done it safely because we've not seen an increase in the outbreaks of foodborne illness. We have seen an increase in the number of complaints to our advice line, but there are different types of complaints. And we have seen an increase in the number of protected disclosures that I received as the CEO of the FSAI. This is where an employee in the industry sees something wrong and they blow the whistle. And then we're duty bound under legislation to investigate that. What has happened though is that our audit program decreased because obviously we wanted to make sure that our team was safe. It wouldn't be good if the team wasn't available to us in the food safety crisis, so we took a decision. We said audits at this point in time are not critical. We've now started up the audit program again, but we're always watching the public health advice to make sure that we are not contributing to the public health the pandemic, but equally that our staff their health is maintained during this really, really difficult time. So lots going on. And I'm going to finish here with some key messages that I just wanted to share with you. I hope I've described to you, I hope I've given you the basis upon which, if you didn't believe that a regulatory system needed to be robust and resilient, I hope I've now shown to you that by having one, you can respond effectively. So a system can only be resilient if it's robust to begin with. We've built our system in Ireland over 20 years, and maybe a bit more. But indeed, it's a system that's constantly being assessed and evaluated to identify opportunities for improvement. You need to be, robust as an organization, and we have a great team within the FSAI, a team that's very well connected. We work hard on our relationships with our stakeholders. We nurture those relationships because we never quite know when we're going to need them. But you need to be, as an organization and a system, it needs to be trusted. And you need to be trustworthy because you want to be the voice that consumers listen to when there's a risk to them with respect to food. The system needs to be adaptable, it needs to be flexible. And of course, we have shown, even within the European Union, where there's a significant body of legislation there is an ability to adapt and to be flexible. And I think that's a key learning for us. But a shock to a system is disruptive, and you have to be responsive. Your system has to be agile enough in order for you to be able to respond to the crisis that you're in. And hopefully not a food safety crisis, but of course we're in another crisis, and we still remain so. Have a plan. That was the one thing that worked for us. We had a plan, we knew what we were going to do if something happened. And when our Prime Minister stood up in the US, because he was there for St. Patrick's Day, on the 12th of March in 2020, he said to the Irish public, work from home. So within a week, our entire organization became unavailable to us. Within 24 hours, I'd lost 35% of my staff because they had children and the schools were closed. This is a story that's repeated right all over the world, but we had a plan. And all I had to do, thankfully, and this is not down to just me, it's down to the fact that I have a team, and this plan was developed by my director of Food Science and Standards, Wayne Anderson. He developed the plan, we bought on, we all committed to the plan. And now what we're doing is we're learning from what worked and what doesn't work. And I think the one thing I'd like to say is that we have learned an awful lot about ourselves as an organization, as a system, both nationally and internationally. Wouldn't it be a shame if we didn't really start to learn from the lessons that the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us and will continue to teach us? Because the last thing we want as food safety experts and regulators is an outbreak, a global outbreak of foodborne illness based on a virus, or indeed on any other pathogen. But in fact, it is about making sure that we take on board the learnings. And what I've talked to you today about, we're going to publish on our website in a couple of weeks' time, and I can send it around the link to the participants, but it does capture what we did, what happened. But I think we still have a body of work to do, because this pandemic, as we know, isn't going away. And hopefully over time we'll get better at living with it, but it is here, and we do have to think about how do we adapt what we learned and make sure that we can adapt our systems so they maintain resilience. I hope I've shown to you why it is so important to have resilience within your food regulatory system. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope I didn't.
Thank you so much, Pam, for this great overview. And I don't know if we have any questions online. Or yeah, there are at least a couple of questions here in the room. So Zainab, please.
Thank you, Pam, for this great presentation. You mentioned that among the official control challenges, sailing by online sailing. So that's what actually we were discussing during lunch with Sam, because I guess all countries are facing this problem. It's the case also in Morocco usually. So I want to know, do you have any legislation or any plan, program to face this problem? How do you control the sailing, online sailing? Because I know in Germany they already have legislation, they control, but I don't know if it's for all countries in Europe, or do you have special legislation in Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, there is a European framework which kind of oversees and governs and legislates for the e-commerce environment, and that was pre-COVID. So it was very much around the online sales of supplements. But the principle is, if you are registered as a food business, the law applies to you whether you trade online or face-to-face in a building. And we've always held that principle and made sure that when we're talking to businesses and we're engaging with them, that if they have an online presence as well as a physical presence, that we're obviously looking at that as well in terms of its compliance with the legislation. It's when a business is trading solely online, then obviously you need other tools. So you need access to the internet, you need to be able to look for these businesses. And particularly a number of these businesses are, a number of them are non-compliant. And we found this through our, I would say, trawl of the internet and various different social media sites. Difficulty is though, if you have a government IP address and you're looking at these businesses, they'll pick up your IP address and they can shut down within 24 hours. So what we have in the FSAI is a standalone system that isn't connected to our network. So we can look at businesses and understand what it is they're doing and whether or not they're compliant. So we do a lot of desk-based investigation of a business based on its online trading, and then we'll then look to see where it needs to, or where it is non-compliant. That was pre-COVID. I think COVID has just thrown up so many different challenges for us as regulators, and I think there's, because this is a global problem, there's a need to think about it more globally because food is traded globally. And I haven't got a plan yet. We're working on one. It is something, but it is very challenging. And we talked about digitalization of the system, and Bobby gave us a great presentation, and so did Gabor this morning. That, there's so many different systems out there, and so much, the capacity isn't the same in every organization or indeed every country, that there's an opportunity, I think, to collaborate and to share. And I think even just look at, who's doing it well, and is there a way we can learn from them? But it's also a way we can partner with them. But it is definitely a journey that we're on, and I think every country is on. It's a difficult one.
Yeah, big challenge.
Thank you, Pam and Gabor. You had a question, I believe.
Yes. What was the more difficult part, the risk management or the risk communication in this whole situation? Because I think both were extremely difficult exercises to basically managing the new type of problems which food businesses are facing with or doing, or there are a lot of new people enter to the e-commerce as well as just the food industry. Also, as, for instance, takeaway companies, they also part of the supply chain right now. Or communicating with them in terms of there are a lot of misconceptions related to COVID. There are still disagreements on the frozen package and COVID relationship, that it can be transmitted or not. There are different. So what was more difficult for you in this whole period? Because I think this was the two big components in this crisis.
For me, as the CEO, I think it was the risk management, and because I think we have well-established mechanisms for risk communication, and because we have a very strict approach to how we communicate in times of risk to consumers, that we are then the voice that cuts through in all of the noise. If there is a risk, consumers listen to us. And we've established that over many, many, many years of becoming a very trusted and trustworthy organization in terms of our communication. The risk management was challenging from my perspective because there was so much unknown risk within the system or potentially emerging within the system. And of course, the challenge is how do you understand what those risks are, first of all, and then what actions are you going to take? And even the traditional actions you might take, for example, sending a group of investigators or inspectors out, those tools were not really available to you as they would have been pre-COVID-19, because you had to try and protect your staff, as well as then you had to make sure that you were doing the job you had been legally given, which was to protect consumers. And I suppose from the point of view of just a kind of a leadership role, it was more the risk management. If you ask my team though, I would say they'd say both the same, because there's a group of people that deal with risk management mainly, and then there's others that deal with risk communication, but obviously they communicate. I would say though, and I said this again, I think the food industry did a fantastic job of managing food safety risk in Ireland within the COVID-19 pandemic, and they are still doing so. They have taken lots of measures in order to protect their staff, to protect their supply chains, but they required us to be flexible. So one of the flexibilities, for example, was in relation to focusing, so for example, if they had to change supplier of ingredients, then we asked them to make sure that they prioritized their review of that supplier, that new supplier, in terms of food safety, but also in terms of allergens. So that was one flexibility. Another one was in relation to oversticking on packs. So if, for example, they changed a recipe that they communicated that, but they also made sure that their focus was on allergens, for example. We just said, please, whatever you do, make sure you know what's in the product, because we do have people who suffer from allergies, and you are required to notify. So I think, it's a difficult one, but for me, I think the risk management piece was a little bit more challenging.
Well, again, thank you so much, Pam, for this. And with that, in fact, we are reaching the end of our workshop and of our session. It has been an amazing actually, if we count the 5 days of discussions on food safety here hosted in Dubai. And it's going to be a challenge for me to attempt to summarize or wrap up, what was really reviewed amongst us. But again, I think going back to the last presentation, and I think all the comments and challenges that were shared by Pam, and also the way the proposals about addressing these challenges through the right level of preparedness, and the emphasis on having robust food control systems, and therefore the importance of investing in developing and maintaining these food control systems. I think this is a great way to end probably this symposium as a reminder for the various areas that we need to pay attention to and hopefully continue to invest in, both for the region, but also for various parts of the world. Throughout the various discussions, we were reminded of the importance of having the appropriate food regulatory decision-making framework, the emphasis of risk analysis. We reviewed that and discussed that quite a bit, and particularly discussed the needs for the region, the investment in scientific capacity, and more importantly, in scientific competencies at various levels, whether be it in risk assessment, in laboratory operations, and in ensuring that there is the level of capacity building that is needed. Making sure that whatever is done in alignment with the international guidance that we received from the Codex Alimentarius Commission. And we had a number of discussions where we looked at various means to ensure the enhanced capacity of the region here, particularly to contribute to the international food standard setting process, but also to maximize the impacts of Codex standards on food control systems in the region. We had a number of initiatives that were either reported on or announced as part of this symposium. We have witnessed the launch of the Arab section of AOAC International, which hopefully will be formally created by the end of March of 2022. We mentioned as well the importance to invest even more in standardization of food laboratory methods across the region, and also to further anchor the work within the regional organizations that support the food control systems in the region. And we have enjoyed very much the collaboration of the GCC Standardization Organization, as well as the Arab Industrial Development, Standardization and Mining Organization. And again, we also announced a tool for further dissemination of the information, knowledge sharing, particularly in the context of food regulatory science, and that's the Journal of the Global Food Regulatory Science Society. With this, in fact, we reach the end of this symposium, and it will take me quite a bit to thank all those who made this possible, but I will have to cite a few, and please forgive me if I have omitted one organization or a sum of individuals who have contributed to the making of this event. I will start, first of all, with the organizations that enabled this to happen. We would not have been able to do this without the support of the board of directors, the leadership, the members of the Global Food Regulatory Science Society. We would not have been able to do this without the support of Université Laval, the platform of food risk analysis and regulatory excellence that is jointly formed by the Institute of Nutrition and Functional Food, INAF, as well as the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Science at Université Laval in Quebec City, Canada. Our host, the Dubai municipality. We are so indebted to the Dubai municipality to enable us to have access to this forum through the 15th Dubai International Food Safety Conference, and to be able to couple our initiatives with this conference and this event, and particularly after a period where most of our activities, most of our knowledge sharing happened mostly online. So it was really a tremendous opportunity, at least, to meet some of you, some of the colleagues here in Dubai. Of course, the co-conveners of this event, and I mentioned already some of them, but I would like to mention them again. The Arab Industrial Development Standardization and Mining Organization. We all enjoyed the support through the welcoming remarks that were addressed to all participants from Engineer Adel Sakr, His Excellency, the Director General of ETSMO. We enjoyed very much the support and the co-convening effort of the GCC Standardization Organization, of AOAC International, of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, as well as of the Arab Task Force on Food Safety, represented here by its chair, Engineer Angela Rashida, Deputy Director General of the Jordan Food and Drug Organization or Authority. We also enjoyed the sponsorship of the company R-Biofarm, so we are very much thankful to all these organizations. And finally, to the team who made this possible, and so many of them have worked behind the scenes, but I would like to mention particularly two team members from the GForce team. So Dr. Amin Assouf, as well as Dr. Eli Bouyazbek here present. So you don't see them in the screen because they continue to work behind the scene. Without their collaboration and support, this event would not have been possible in the way it was organized. And again, so many others behind the scene. To all the participants, to all the speakers, to all the contributors, a big thanks to you all. And I will say now, this is the closure and the end of the first Symposium on Food Regulatory Science, the Global Food Regulatory Science Symposium. We will say au revoir. We'll give you a rendezvous for another Global Food Regulatory Science Symposium, hopefully in conjunction also with the Dubai International Food Safety Conference. Thank you to all of you.
Merci à toi. Salut. Salut. Merci à toi.
Thank you.